to him that I had listed a house across the street that we literally called the Roach House because it was every time you opened the front door, 50 roaches went
Oh,
all over the
wow.
place. It was horrible. And the person who bought it basically bought it, replaced the three windows that were missing, and didn't do much else to it. Didn't paint it, didn't improve it, nothing. And they put renters in there, and it just absolutely turned my stomach. And I was trying to explain to them that this is indicative of the area. We've got to get this area improved. And every time Habitat does a project, the area around it gets improved, partly because Habitat helps, but also because of neighborhood pride. So they ended up dedicating this just recently. It was 10 duplex units and a home for a wounded warrior. And they called me up. They recognized me a couple of years ago as a champion supporter or some crazy thing, right? And that was nice. It was really sweet. The thing is, it is a big, big deal and a big, big asset to that area and to the city of Escondido, and I could not be more proud if I tried. So I want to talk a little bit about Habitat and how wonderful they are, and you and I can talk about it in the fourth segment. So to start off, let's talk about what the Fed did a couple of days ago. The Fed raised interest rates by 1/4 point. And I've received a lot of phone calls from people wanting to know, how does that affect me? How does that affect my mortgage? How does that affect different things? And I know before the show we were talking about mortgages and rates and that kind of thing. And people are really interested in how this move will affect different things. Well, first of all, let's talk about why they did it. One of the reasons why the Fed raised interest rates by 1/4% is because they didn't have any other choice. Basically, we are at a point where our economy has recovered to a point, but it's basically an eggshell type recovery. That eggshell is starting to crack. We're going to be approaching a recession in the not too distant future, and they don't have any bullets or any arrows left in the quiver. They don't have anything left in their toolbox. So they're raising interest rates right now, knowing that they're going to force us into a recession, knowing that they're going to basically slow down our economy. And they're doing it on purpose so that at some point when we enter into a recession, they can actually go and lower interest rates again. For quite a while now, several years now, we've been at 0%. You can't go lower than zero if you're the Federal Reserve. And so they had to do this so that they've got some tools in their toolbox, and that's okay. Here's the deal. What it does basically is it increases the rate at which a lot of corporations borrow their money, because the first thing that happened as soon as the Fed raised interest rates was the prime rate was increased by the same amount. So it basically mirrors what happens with the Fed. That increases the cost of borrowing for these corporations. And if you think about this for a second, I don't know if you've seen this movie or not, but there's a movie called Too Big to Fail that came out several years ago about the Great Crash. And one of the things that they talked about in particular, or one of the things that happened in the movie, was Jeffrey Immelt, who was the CEO of GE at the time, called the Treasury Secretary at the time, Hank Paulson, and said, "Hey, Hank, I don't know if you know this, but things are worse than you thought they were." And he said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "GE, General Electric Corporation, one of the top corporations in the world in terms of credit rating, all that, was not going to be able to make their payroll." Well, what does that mean? It means that GE borrows the money, and a lot of these major corporations borrow money on their credit lines in order to make their payroll. So imagine this for a second. They literally borrow billions and billions of dollars every month in order to make their payroll. If they're borrowing that kind of money and the rate goes up by 1/4%, do you think that they're going to be hiring more people?
No.
Right? Because they're not going to drive their payrolls up. Right? So now it's cost more for them to do business. So now what do they have to do? They either have to lay people off in a big way, or they have to basically pass the cost on to the consumer. One of the things that we've noticed in the last few years is inflation staying in check, and a lot of these companies have had to turn around and lay people off, a lot of their people off, because they haven't been able to make everything, they haven't been able to pass the cost on to the consumer. So what they've done is they've done everything they can possibly do. Now the cost cutting is layoffs. For instance, HP, Hewlett-Packard, just recently announced 85,000 layoffs in the next 3 years nationwide. HP is a major employer in San Diego County. Qualcomm is paring 15% of their workforce. That's a large number here in San Diego County. Qualcomm's a huge, huge San Diego County employer. The reason they're doing that is because they know that we have a recovery that's basically a jobless recovery. We literally have a labor participation rate that's at a 38-year low. And so what's happening right now is by the Fed raising interest rates like this, they're costing big corporations like General Electric and McDonald's and those types of companies.
Right.
They're costing them more money, and so now they're going to have to pare back in terms of their hiring. What that does is that causes the economy to shrink, and when the economy starts to shrink, that's what we call a recession. So I hope that clears things up in terms of what the Fed is up to and what they're doing. Here's the deal. They couldn't wait any longer to do it, and they absolutely had to start doing it because they had to be able, when we go into a recession, to turn around and lower interest rates again. You can't go lower than zero. The deal is, in terms of how it affects us personally, is your credit card rates are going to go up. Your credit card interest rates are going to go up because they're variable, a lot of them. If you have a variable auto loan, it's going to go up. If you have a variable interest rate on your mortgage, those indices, the indexes that actually drive where that goes, because on an adjustable rate mortgage, you have a thing called a margin, you have a thing called a teaser rate, and you have a thing called an index. The index plus the margin is whatever your new interest rate's going to be.
Right.
The index is like the rudder on a ship, right? The margin is the profit. The index is like the rudder on a ship. So it tells, pardon me, it tells, you're worried about coughing. Pardon me. It tells the rate on the arm where to go. And so what you have right now is you have those indices going up to match that 0.25% increase, and that's going to have an effect on payment. It's going to have an effect on interest rate. It's going to have an effect on terms. So it's going to be more expensive if you have an adjustable rate mortgage. It's going to be more expensive, and the Fed, we believe, is going to continue to raise interest rates. So your rate as an adjustable rate if you're an adjustable rate borrower, is going to continue to go up. So what I would do is contact your mortgage company and look at potentially locking in, because this is just the beginning of what's going to come. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a few more of these, because they've got to have, like I said, some tools in their toolbox. Okay? So we're basically at a point where we have a jobless recovery. We have a Fed who had no other choice but to pull this trigger, and what they're basically doing now is that trigger that they pulled is basically going to force things to slow down and eventually force us into a recession. What not a lot of people know, because they don't go to our market updates at our office in Escondido, but what not a lot of people realize is literally last month, the University of San Diego does an index of leading economic indicators here for San Diego County. Index of leading economic indicators tells us what's going to happen 6 months down the road. Projects 6 months down the road what's going to take place. In March of 2009, it hit a low. It started back up from this valley, from this trough. It started back up, and it's steadily risen until last month. Last month it turned negative, and not a lot of people realize that. A lot of people realize that the median income in San Diego County is actually down 4.05% the last 3 years. Not a lot of people realize that March of 2010, we hit a peak in San Diego County from the number of people employed, and it's been going down ever since. So there's a lot of things going on here in San Diego County, and a lot of things going on nationally, that are going to have an impact on what's happening in our local market. And so one of the things that's important to realize is we're approaching a potential downturn. We're looking probably in April or May, in terms of these leading economic indicators. Sometime April or May, we're looking at a potential slowdown here locally. That's kind of what we're seeing nationally too. And this is all based on numbers. It's not based on somebody looking through a looking glass. It literally is based on crunching numbers, and numbers that they've been crunching for a number of years now. So I think it's important that people realize that interest rates are not only going up, and their mortgages and their credit card rates are also going up, but corporations' cost of payroll is going up, and it's going to affect things. So that's one thing. The other thing is, we historically in real estate always see a bump up, a run because historically when interest rates start to rise, because people are waiting for interest rates to go to 30-year fixed for at 2%, 30-year fixed, and they obviously realize that's not going to happen, so they get off the fence and they jump in. So we should see a spurt here over the next 2 to 3, maybe 4 months of buying activity, which is not a bad thing for us here in San Diego County. What should happen after that, though, is things should start to slow. So we're looking at a potential recession nationally. We're looking at a slowdown here in San Diego County in terms of the economy. And it's not the rosiest picture in the world, but there are some real opportunities that come with that type of a market. When we come back, we're going to actually talk about how you can go about using Kathy Majum with Orr and Associates, and how you can win at wealth with her by using her. Kathy's with Vice President of Personal Lines with Orr and Associates, and her phone number is 951-331-7614. 951-331-7614. Give her a call today. You're not going to believe what we're going to tell you after the break about my experience with her. This is the Mike Litton Show. I'm your host, Mike Litton. Kathy Majum's in the house with us. We'll be right back.
I'm glad you got to